The words of the Gospel of Luke, which have been preserved by the Church and handed down to us through the centuries for our hearing, our understanding, and our discussion this morning. There once was a rich man expensively dressed in the latest fashions, wasting his days in conspicuous consumption. A poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, had been dumped on his doorstep. All he lived for was to get a meal from scraps off the rich man's table. His best friends were the dogs who came and licked his sores. Then he died, this poor man, and was taken up by the angels to the lap of Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades and in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham in the distance and Lazarus in his lap. He called out, "Father Abraham, mercy, have mercy. Send Lazarus to dip his finger in water to cool my tongue. I'm in agony in this fire." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that in your lifetime you got the good things and Lazarus the bad things. It's not like that here. Here he's consoled and you're tormented. Besides, in all these matters there is a huge chasm set between us, that no one can go from us to you even if he wanted to, nor can anyone cross over from you to us." The rich man said, "Then let me ask you, a wise one, send him to the house of my father, where I have 5 brothers, so he can tell them the score and warn them, so they won't end up here in this place of torment." Abraham answered, "They have Moses and the prophets to tell them the score. Let them listen to them." "I know, Father Abraham," said, "but they're not listening. If someone came back to them from the dead, they would change their ways." Abraham replied, "If they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to be convinced by someone who rises from the dead." This is the gospel of Christ.
Praise to Christ the Lord.
This gospel reading goes right to the heart of the question I've been asking for some time now, the question of what will it take? What will it take for people to make a change? What will it take for people to see the vision of God's beloved community as the gospel writers are trying to put it forth? You see that Luke's answer is that even if the dead came back and talked to us, it still wouldn't make any difference. He uses Lazarus, which is really interesting here. This is in the gospel, in Luke's gospel, it's the only time in all the parables that a person is identified with the name Lazarus, Jesus. And is this the same Lazarus that we hear about in the Gospel of John? The one that's Mary and Martha's brother? The one that is Jesus' closest friend? Well, probably it's the same person that Luke had in mind. He knows some things about the story, obviously, even though the Gospel of John was written much, much later than the Gospel of Luke, most likely. And the whole idea that there is somebody who is risen from the dead, as Lazarus was, might have been in his head, or that story might have been floating around. By the time you get to the Gospel of John, John uses it in a much different way. But here you have the story of Lazarus and Dives, or as they say in Latin, Dives. And Dives, the name itself is really funny because we get this idea of a very, very evil man, but it actually, the name itself means one who is redeemed, or one who can be redeemed, or one who is chosen or loved by God. And so we still get the idea that even though Dives is the one who is very, very the bad guy of the story, there's still room for the rich person who doesn't get it. Now, in the Gospel of Luke, you get the idea that maybe, or you think that maybe, it's possible that there is no hope for the rich. But as I try to state in the opening acclamation, God is the God of both the rich and the poor. You see a really funny, it's really actually the story that's told here is very, very funny, the gospel story itself. It reminds us of a fable. It's more than a parable, it reminds us of a fable. And Luke has a lot of the elements of the fable in it. When I say fable, I'm talking about a Greek fable. Now remember, Luke was a Greek man, and he was writing to people who mostly were not Jews, were not indoctrinated, didn't know all the stories that the Jews had. And so he's trying to relate to them in a way that he thinks that they might understand. So he tells it in the same way that you might understand a Greek myth of today, and what we think of as a Greek myth. The story of there's this big chasm, and there's this place where the good people go, and there's this place where the bad people go. And because the Greeks were into spatial relationships up and down, we get this idea, if you want to know where the idea of heaven and hell comes from, well, part of this comes from the Gospel of Luke this morning. There is this place called Hades, which in Greek mythology, or in the Greek language, was not actually a place that was, well, it was a place below the ground, but everybody went below the ground. Nobody went up. Everybody went below the ground. And the people that were the good guys, they went to a place called the Elysian Fields, which was a beautiful, wonderful garden-like place, so like the Garden of Eden for eternity. And the people who were not so good, they went and they were taken by Carolyn to this place where Hades dwelled, and that was the place where there was eternal fire and eternal damnation, eternal suffering. And you get all those great myths of people who were suffering at the time, like Sisyphus and Tantalus. You know those myths? One guy is meant to roll the boulder all the way up the hill, and just as he gets it to the top, it rolls back down. Or Tantalus, who's standing in water and always thirsty, and every time he bends over in order to drink the water recedes. All these wonderful stories, and that's how we get some of our words like tantalizing and so forth. And Sisyphus, which is a very sibilant word that has to do with fountains and flowing water and so forth. Well, these all tie into this same story. I chose a poem, though, which I thought was a good rejoinder, if you will, to the gospel. What did you think of the poem this morning? That poem. That poem is 200 some years old. It's from the 18th century, actually, by Nesbit. Have you ever heard that poem before, Lazarus Dies? There's some really good stuff in there, especially about how, I love the last part of it, where it says, on page 5, and if he is ours, O ye rich men, then whose in God's name are ye? I thought it was really, really, really wonderful, the juxtaposition between rich and poor. And, of course, as I said, I had an answer for it, at least. I believe that God is the God of the rich and the poor. So if that's true, then what value does today's gospel have? If God is the God of both rich and poor, and I really think that that is the message that the early church even was trying to put forth, then why tell the story about rich people and poor people? It just sort of sets up this tension that's hard to get through. And you get the idea that if you're rich, or if you have any riches, then you certainly aren't welcome. And you somehow have to give it all up. Well, we know that at the time of death, we can't take it with us, at least not to my knowledge. At least nobody that I know has come back and say, I have all these riches I meant to leave with you. Here. And of course, I'm not sure how many people have come back from the dead, period, so don't know any personally. There's some people I suspect, but I've never met them personally, and the only one that did it in the Gospels, I mean, was Lazarus. But what was the problem with Lazarus coming back from the dead? What happened?
He died again.
He died again. So it's a tricky thing. And now here's a very, very, very good Jeopardy question. How many days was Lazarus in the grave? 4. 4, yes. And why 4? Do you remember meaning? Why 4?
Oh, because it could, well, as far as I recall, because it couldn't be the same as Jesus.
Right, they didn't want it to confuse it with what happened in Jesus. So apparently, if you're in the grave 4 days, you're not coming back for good. If you're in the grave 3 days, then you have a better chance. You know, I guess that's sort of how it worked out.
Immediately, I mean, when he came back to life, did he immediately die, or was he?
He was around for a while. We don't know. We don't know what happened to him. The rumor is that he was killed by Paul, who at that time was Saul. That's what in the Last Temptation of Christ is what happens in that particular book.
But in that, was he still a real person, or did he?
Lazarus, well, this is a different Lazarus. But Lazarus, well, Lazarus was one of the things that he's identified with the person in rags, because he was wrapped in rags when he died. So the idea is that somebody who came back was very, very poor and smelly and so forth. If you've been in the grave 4 days, that's true.
Right, that's what I wanted. I thought that Lazarus was kind of degrading already.
He was.
Okay.
As far as we know. I mean, I wasn't there, but they didn't say exactly degrading Lazarus. But he was in the tomb 4 days, and they did not do embalming like we understand it, not like the Egyptians did, and so forth. So, no draining of blood or anything. So he smelled pretty bad. In fact, if you've ever seen the movie The Last Temptation of Christ, I think it's one of the most powerful scenes in that whole movie, where Jesus is calling for him. Jesus, played by Willem Dafoe, of all people. Jesus is calling for him, and he doesn't come out. I think, remember we watched that that Easter, you remember that?
Yeah.
You remember that, Alexander? Because I remember it scared you too. It scared me. He comes, all of a sudden, it's totally silent, and you think when it's going to happen, and all of a sudden, this hand reaches out of the grave. It's sort of like a first tier horror movie. And but when they open up the grave, everybody's like this because the smell was just so bad. And you know, they're like this, and then all of a sudden this hand comes out and grabs Jesus' arm. It really, it's an incredible moment. It gives me chills just talking about it. You have another question?
God is both the God of the regenerator. Does that mean that Jesus condones, or God condones, economic and social inequity? Didn't hear the question.
Oh, you want to, Professor, would you stand and say that again, please? This is Professor Robin Anderson, who is a professor of social justice at Fordham University. One of the courses she teaches is social justice, so hence the question, I'm sure.
I just wondered if God was the God of both the rich and the poor. Does that mean that he condones social and economic inequities?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think when they speak about the rich and the poor that they're necessarily speaking about money. I think they're speaking about consciousness. And God gave us the gift of thought and free will equally at birth. And it's the way that you use that brings the awareness of the Christ in you, which is what Christ did. He was born human, and then he had the flesh. He experienced pain and sorrow. He was able to manifest beyond that to the archetypical, great unified consciousness, which is the Christ consciousness.
I think the question presupposes a transcendent God that doesn't exist.
That you believe does not exist.
Correct.
Because some people would argue with you that that's not true. But, yes, okay.
Well, we used to wear a t-shirt that said God is alive, he just doesn't want to get involved.
I like that.
That things exist, not that God's going to change the way things are. That's the way things are. What is the name?
Robin.
Robin, in my hope, I would like to think that it's not God that condones or would want that injustice, but I'm reminded that we are given free will.
Right.
And I think that, the God that I want to believe in would not want that disparity or injustice, and leaves it up to us, to make it all fair and good.
Let's simply take God out of the equation for a second, and maybe just substitute to be less immanent and less anthropomorphic. In other words, making God into a human being that has human feelings and so forth. Let's say, what does the universe deal with? And certainly in the universe, there is the dichotomy between rich and poor. It's kind of hard to know where one draws the line. How can you tell what's rich and what's poor? And as you pointed out, it could be just, it may not have much to do with money. It might have to do with attitude and feeling and sensory perception and all sorts of things, the things that really make us rich. Last week, I used as an example the saying that money will never make, what was it, money never made anyone rich, which Joanne put on the sign this past week. The whole idea that it's not just about money, it's about many, many other things. But so let's take that out of the equation for a second and say, okay, what does the universe deal us? The universe obviously deals us the fact that there are people who are rich and poor, however we define that. And the question is, if that's true, then it's part of the whole thing in looking at that is that we see them as opposites, but they may not be. They may not be opposites at all. They may be just two sides of the same coin. This is sort of, yeah. They could be. It's what I put in the opening thing by Moltmann this morning. Jurgen Moltmann of all people. His great theory. His book is called God of Hope. He says the opposite of poverty is not property, rather the opposite of both is community. Now, if you think about that for a second, that's really very interesting. What that means is that we don't need to see rich and poor as being opposites. We need to see them as being both part of the same creation, the same life, and we need, what it does is it challenges us as members of a community to make sure that they do interact. Because there are great movements within human will that separates off rich and poor financially, but also in many other ways. Socially, economically, how people are ministered to, the whole idea of what social justice really is not so much a matter of that the have-nots should have, as much as the have-nots should interact with the haves more often, and that there should be a better balance between, or better interaction between them, especially in the whole context of community. The whole purpose of the gospel lesson this morning is to build community. And one of the things that Luke was trying to say, and the church in its best moment in Luke's day, his particular church, was that it's not so much that people are going to go to hell if they have too much money, which is what somebody might derive, and sometimes what the church has preached. This particular gospel lesson is used a lot at this time of year in churches to talk about stewardship, to guilt people into giving money. But in the best sense of stewardship, what it should do is let people assess what it is that they truly have, not only money, but other things also, and say, is it possible that in the best sense of community, that all the things that we have, not just our money, but all the things that we have, need to be shared in a way that they're not currently being done to the best of their advantage?
Luke throws in exactly the kind of thing that you're saying is, the translation here doesn't carry it in. There's where Lazarus is sitting as a gate, and the Greek word kulon, a gate, and it means that you can go through it. And Lazarus and the rich man are on the two sides of the gate. The gate is open. The rich man could reach out to the poor man. He doesn't throw him out. And this is one reason why the parable would have puzzled the listeners. Because the rich man didn't do anything more. It was a lack of doing something. The Jewish emphasis has always been on doing, not on not doing. So the fact that he didn't do something isn't something that he would be tossed out for. Then, when you get to the Hades scene, you have now the gate, which was open for both, is now closed. There's a big gap. If he wants to make the journey now, it's too late. And this is the kind of thing that he's introducing here. He's not condemning the rich man for having been rich. He's condemning him for not having the sensitivity to walk through the gate. look to the sort of social stuff that Martin's talking about.
Or, traditionally, lives is laying at the gates of the city. It says at the very beginning of this that he was so poor that even the dogs came up to lick his sores. And he's right at the gate, and what happened was that every time that the rich man walked by, who you notice doesn't have a name, every time the rich man walks by, he just ignored the person. It's sort of like walking by the homeless person. I can remember one time in New York City watching a homeless person on 92nd Street, where I was living at the time, come by and say, excuse me. Well, actually, I take that back. Watching a person, I didn't know if he were homeless or not. It turned out that he was just a regular person. He wasn't homeless. He was an everyday person. But he came and said, excuse me, people walk by, excuse me, finally, he just stood in the middle of the street and said, for God's sakes, I just want someone to let me know what time it is. But everybody was so afraid that he was going to be asking for money, they wouldn't even stop to engage him. I think that's the sort of thing that is here. There are times that we walk past a lot without ever getting engaged in it. And it doesn't take belief in imminent or a distant God to even understand that whole idea of justice, if you will, or how we might want to live our lives, walking by and never getting involved is can be a very devastating thing for the life of a community.
Well, doesn't the poor, aside from mental illness and things that can hinder people from functioning fully, doesn't a poor person have a responsibility as well in our community to grow? In other words, in part one, I forget which, but when you bury your talents, they're taken away from you, as opposed to getting more. So if you have a talent that can help you grow and you don't use it, God takes it away. You say you didn't use it.
I don't think that God takes it away. I think that God always is calling you forth in us. Again, because of our free will, I think that sometimes we don't open ourselves up to it. And I think there is a responsibility for the poor and the rich, everyone. See, I think that in this story, there are no poor and rich, as much as saying that we're both. Every person is both, whether they realize it or not. Some people, all they see is the poor side. Some people, all they act is the rich side. But we're both. And in this particular gospel, one of the things that's being called forth is the fact that if we are both, then the question is, how should we therefore proceed?
The other thing I wanted to address about that is I live in Canada and I live in a very nice neighborhood. But we do get homeless people, and I notice that a lot of the people in the neighborhood will ignore them, like you're talking about. But I think the homeless people give those of us who are in a better position the opportunity to grow. So I don't think, for me personally, having them in my community hasn't taken away. It's made me look at, what I can offer, and help me appreciate my life.
Well, I'll tell you a story about that. I used to be president of the Coalition for the Homeless. I was for 8 years in Westchester County. And then I spent another years as on the board of Coalition of Food Pantries and Soup Kitchens, and founded an organization called Food Patch, which feeds a lot of the hungry in Westchester County and beyond. And when we were first starting to do homeless work in Westchester County, the county, in order to subvert our work, and I have no other good word for it, subvert our work, was saying that we were not allowed to house people more than one night. Because if we did, then we were now a shelter, and that had a whole other set of things that you had to do in order for that to happen. So what we did is we got 29 churches and synagogues together, and we moved the homeless people every night to a different one. We had them showered at the Y in White Plains. We had them fed by Grace Church downtown White Plains. And then we moved them to St. Bernard's in White Plains, to my church in Hartsdale, to a different synagogue every night. And because we had 29, it meant that each synagogue or church only had to have people one night. Just about. Some people double up. My board, my vestry, bought into this, was very, very much behind it, understood what I was trying to do, thought it was a great thing for the community. There were not many homeless in Hartsdale particularly, but there were many in Westchester County. And what what happened was that when people presented themselves as being homeless in Westchester County, if you were from a different county, they would send you back to that county to be taken care of. They wouldn't help you. They would put you on the bus. They give you a bus fare. But they weren't going to care for you. You weren't theirs. So this caused a lot of issues. But I remember on Christmas Eve, it was our turn to house the homeless, and they were all set up with their cots and everything in the parish hall. And one of my vestry members came in and said, "Do those people have to be here tonight? I mean, this is one of the holiest days of the year." I said, "Have you ever heard the Christmas story? No room at the inn? Well, you can't always have your way, you know." I was floored. And this was somebody who had bought into the whole process. But it didn't click when it came down to that moment. That moment of walking in expecting to be different. Do we have to have those people here tonight? I mean, it was really, talking about giving me chills, that still gives me chills to tell that story. And here was somebody who was really, generally very, very, very well-meaning, but just didn't make the connection. That's when preachers sit down and when everyone leaves the room, they bang their head against the wall. I discovered, does anybody here listen to the John Tesh radio show sometimes on WFS? You know that banging your head against the wall uses 135 calories an hour. So you would think I lost a lot of weight by that time, but it hasn't happened. I promise not to bang my head much longer. Yes. But if you think about that, I mean, gosh, I thought, wow, what will it take? This is very, 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 very deep. But what he was saying to me, though, the more I thought about it, was that somehow he felt like I wasn't listening to what his needs were. And everybody has needs. One of the things that we have to try, do you know people who move in, do you know what it means when people move in on your grief? Ever had that happen to you? You're saying, "Oh, it's really been bad. My mother died, and I'm just really, I don't know what to say." And somebody says, "Well, my mother died too, you know." In fact, she was killed when an elephant stepped on top of her, and then chopped up and used for cannibal meat. You just don't know quite how to respond and say, "Well, I'm so sorry to hear that." Well, just remember, it's just not you who's suffering. That's moving in on your grief. And people tend to do that an awful lot on all sorts of things, you know. The whole idea that misery loves company. But the idea really in the whole gospel concept is we all know that. We know what it's like to be sad, to feel like we've lost something, to feel like we are the poor. I can remember when Beverly Janice, who used to sit right over here, was in this congregation. She had been shot by her husband 7 times. He not only shot her twice in the back, but then he came up while she was on the ground and he shot her 3 more times in the neck. She managed to get up and run after that, and he shot her again. And she started coming to church here not too long after that. And she's alive. And she managed to survive all those wounds and come to church. I remember we were talking about something about grief and you know, how bad could it get? It's kind of hard to get much worse than being shot 7 times. It really is. And in fact, her daughter, when we were talking about this, said, "I want to tell you something. None of you have been through what my mother has been through. You will have no room to talk. So just shut up. You don't know what pain is." And the woman behind her tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Dear, we've all been there one way or the other." And she just shrugged it off like that. So I said to Kate afterwards, I said, "Kate, do you know that woman was that touched you on the shoulder?" She said, "No, I don't know," but she was very rude. She certainly didn't understand. I said, "I want to tell you something. That lady touched you on the shoulder. Her 18-year-old daughter committed suicide and did not leave a note." Now, you don't want to compare griefs here, But there are people who have been there and have been there in ways that you cannot imagine. And I thought it was a really wonderful thing that Gita was reaching out to her at that moment and trying to say, yes, dear, we all understand. And I think the nice thing about what this whole thing is trying to elicit in us is the idea that there are both rich and poor in community, that we are often both that in our lives. And as far as what justice there is, I think that since we are both those, at the time that we are have the upper hand, that we have to remember what the lower hand feels like. And the idea is that out of that compassion, that as a sense of community, we reach out to others, because it is something that is part of all our lives. And we want to reduce that chasm by consistently not only praying for the poor, but remembering that we also are poor many times in our lives. And it's because of that, we need to have compassion on other people and with other people. And we may be that person who gets shot 7 times or loses our daughter. It can happen to any of us or to our family members. Hopefully it never will, but we all experience. There's one thing that's really, really sure. The reason that he uses the whole experience of death is because here is something that everybody does experience, to my knowledge. Everybody dies, to my knowledge. And it is painful often when people are dying for the dying themselves, but once they die, hopefully they are at peace. But it is particularly painful for the people who remain oftentimes, and the separation, that gap. And if we kept that gap in our mind, if we looked at our lives and said that the gap that we feel when we lose something, when we're lost, as we were talking about a couple weeks ago, when that loss happens, if we can keep that gap in our mind always in dealing with other people, that we don't want to have that loss between us, that separation between us, then that's the type of life that the Gospel of Luke is trying to put out there and saying that in the early church community, what brought people together was the whole idea that by being with other people, the loss is lessened. Because there are people to lift you up, people to hold you, people to say, I know what that, I've been through that myself. And that we are all rich and poor in different parts of our lives. That's why I believe God is the God of both rich and poor, because we are both.
The name Lazarus is an interesting one here, because it's sort of a shortening of a Hebrew name, Eleazar. The nickname for Eleazar would be Lazar. And then the Greek sticks an OS on top of Lazarus, and then the Latin makes it Lazarus. The meaning of Eleazar is interesting in the light of the parable. It means the one whom God helps. When you contrast the rich man and Lazarus, the rich man is the one that God helps. The angels carry him off into the bosom of Abraham, and the rich man is going to get out too well. It's an interesting play on the list. Maybe that's the reason why this is the only parable with a name in it.
Well, also, you have dives too, or dives, you know, and rich, yeah. But dives in the Latin, yeah, but it also carries the whole idea of not necessarily rich in money. It carries with the whole idea of rich because of what has been divided off, dives, to divide off. And so it's not sure as to what it is that has been divided off. But there is a separation. The whole idea is that man somehow separated because of his stature or his being.
I believe that a lot of poor people, at least the poor people that I've come across, are actually wealthier than I am. Because they know how to survive on little to nothing, which I don't. And I think that's sometimes in life more important. It's easy to survive if you have $1 million in the bank. It's not so easy if you live from paycheck to paycheck.
Or have no paycheck.
I had a friend who lived on Long Island. They were the nicest people in the world. They didn't have a pocket kiss. They were sweethearts. They always took me in like a long-lost relative. All right? And when I one day wanted to buy them groceries, no, we don't need anything. But they had no food in the refrigerator.
Well, where it gets really, really tricky is when you, in the whole context of liberation theology, in South America, for instance, I've not been to Africa, but I have been to South America, where I've seen very, very, very poor people who really have nothing. Very little clothing, not even, they're living under trees in the forest, in the jungle. Nothing. These people, when I went there, wanted to talk about their relationship with God and what they had. Now, it's really interesting to talk to people who truly have nothing and talk about what it is, or talk about God. Because if you have nothing, what is it that you can possibly own? And in the whole concept of liberation theology, what grew out of this is sort of what you were saying, but in a much deeper way, that many of these people tell you, but I have so much. And, or they have been taught through liberation theology that even though they may not have something in this moment, that what was attracted to them, that in the world to come, or in God's kingdom, God's beloved community, they would have everything. And that, for many people, was very, very, very powerful and important. And I'd say that in many, 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 many poor countries, this is part of what has been taught by the church, that even though you have nothing, there is this other world where you might have something. The problem with that, Elie Wiesel says, the great Jewish theologian, says that a child who is hungry cannot look up to God, can only look up to a bowl of rice. And that is the challenge. And because that is true, that's why I think that we need to be partners with the universe in providing that bowl of rice as much as we can.
I've been thinking just what you're saying, and wondering if that, and of course that is the case, doesn't that push the responsibility slightly onto more than the poor, the rich, to in some way reach out?
I think that
and help with that situation.
Just what David was talking about, I think that the responsibility is for us to build community.
Right.
Everyone.
Right.
That takes rich and poor, and the rich and poor in all of us in order to do it.
Right, but if a child is hungry, isn't it up to the person with a full stomach to say, here's the bowl? Or, you know.
Is it up to? I don't know that we can, that we can in any way guilt people into responsibility, or say that it is the rich person's responsibility. However, it is the responsibility of the community to see that all are taken care of. And I think that if nothing else, it is whenever two people encounter each other, no matter how it happens, that I think it is the responsibility to the universe. Maybe it's God's responsibility, if you want to put it that way, to see that the interaction happens. I think that many times it does, that there is a gate that can be walked through that people never walk through, either the rich or the poor. And that one thing, that the reason that the church was born, the reason that, in the best sense of it, the reason that we are here together, is to see that those chasms are lessened by our own interaction, whatever that might be. That's what I believe I preach.
That's magnificent. The community, that answers the question of why he should not have been condemned. The community should have said, this guy's into your door here, come on. Let me take a plate from your table and bring it there. That would be the way to do it. And that would be, cooperation rather than conflict, which was so common. And that's magnificent.
Yeah, I think it's the whole idea of cooperation versus cooperation.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And really, that's where I think community can do its best work.
Something, I don't know why, but came to me maybe about 7-8 years ago, probably, I do know why, but was that I could become homeless, that anyone in this room could become homeless, and it doesn't matter how educated you are and how much money you make. And I keep that in mind every time I walk past someone who's sitting on the street. because I know my health could be taken away somehow. So it doesn't make a person on the street who doesn't have a place to live bad. It means that they've been less fortunate, and that I really believe it could happen to anyone.
Yeah. It was so maddening when I was working as head of the Coalition for Homeless, because I would go to these meetings, and the question was, well, how many are there? And I said, one is too many, as far as I'm concerned. Well, we need to know how many, because if we don't know how many, we can't get the funds. It's based upon, you know, how many people actually. And so what happened was homeless shelters had to keep track of how many people they were serving, and sometimes they got money based upon that whole thing. And so people would say to me as president of the coalition, they'd say, oh, we didn't do our accounting this month, so we really don't know. I said, just make up anything. They said, but that's just awful. You're lying to the government. I said, oh, don't get me started. But I said, make up anything, because whatever you make up, it's not enough. It's not enough. Do you know how many, Westchester County, do you know how many homeless people are in Westchester County? Westchester County has 800,000 people, maybe 1 million now. How many homeless people do you think are in Westchester County? Anybody have an idea? We are the second richest county in the nation. Second richest. How many do you think?
20,000.
35,000.
Wow.
35,000, you said? What does that mean, probably 60?
Well, that's just counting people who are actually homeless. That's not counting the ones that have been burnt out of their homes or forced out of their homes that are living with relatives or friends or family. If you add that in, it's almost 60,000. That's an awful, awful lot. We have more homeless people than in Westchester County than the entire state of Arizona, for instance.
Do we have more of a responsibility than just to helping people to become more activists in our community politically? Because I have an elderly mother, she's 87, with heart failure and kidney failure, and applied for Medicaid. They came to her home. She can't use their program because they won't allow her, they give her 8 hours, I have to pay for 4 to live in health because she can't be alone, which costs me over $100 a day. But they won't allow her to bulk her hours to make it more cost effective for the family. They rather wash their hands of my mother and say, no, we can't use the 8 hours. So we should be more.
That's why working in a community or of other people who understand this is why we form coalitions and like that to try to deal with these things. I went through the same thing with homeless people, where we finally got homeless people food stamps, and then the county government would not allow them to pick them up unless they had an address.
Right. Exactly, stupid rule.
So we sued the county in order to get them to accept anything that's an address, even the local library. They could say that they were living there because they were on the front steps. Then they wouldn't let them pick it up, their food stamps up, unless they had a valid ID, which was a driver's license or passport. So we sued the county again in order to get them to accept anything, even a library card or a letter from someone who knew you, the judge ruled. That's how angry the judge was over the county's refusal. And it went on and on and on. I can't tell you what I've been through, but I can tell you that forming a coalition, doing it in a community, makes it much better, because it's kind of hard to ignore all this cries from the community, especially from all aspects of it. We have people who were homeless themselves advocating, as long with other people who were very, very, very wealthy advocating. And it really makes a big difference when you get the wealthiest person in town and the poorest person in town together to tell the government that they're not doing what they should need to do. It makes a big, big difference. And so my answer to you is that somehow, in finding the right community, or even talking about it with the people here today, you might come up with an answer because other people have been through it.
I wanted to address this woman when she asked, isn't it our responsibility? Elizabeth, isn't it our responsibility? And all I can think of is what comes from one's heart. Because my refrigerator is typically very full. And if I see someone who doesn't have, it's just natural for me to, because I know I have enough. to me, it's such a simple thing, not ought to. It's just like my heart says, this person looks like they haven't eaten. I'm not going to give them money necessarily, but I can go buy them a meal.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting because the same gate that Ray was talking about is often the word that is used for heart in the Greek lessons. The gate of opening, the gate that Lazarus and the rich man could go through, and they went through in order to get to heaven or to wherever they were. That word gate, where Lazarus was sitting, is also the word that's often used for heart. The whole idea of opening the heart is the same as opening the gate. The idea that what we really need to open is not the gate so much as the gate to our soul, the gate to our heart, and whatever. In compassion, compassion comes from the word com, C-O-M, to have passion with. You know, compassion, to do it together. I'd say the best thing that this does is there's a call to community and the value of community in this gospel lesson.
And more about that, and Elizabeth's point is that by saying that it is the community's responsibility, we shouldn't, though, condemn, as I think you were saying too, those in the community who are rich and have, because they may not be at the position yet of having the heart to see that they should have the compassion. So by making the responsibility on the community level, it leaves the people within the community who are rich to be able to say, well, I'm a member of that community and I should be doing, and yet at the same time, the people who are in the community who are rich, who aren't at that point, should not be condemned because they don't act.
Yeah, it's really important, however, that you see the second part of this gospel lesson. I'm going to finish up for this morning. The second part of this gospel lesson we can't ignore. Well, then he says, then go tell my brothers, so they're not going to go through this whole thing that I went through. And I think what that really is talking about is we need to not be worried about what other people are not doing.
Right.
We need to be worried about what we are not doing. And that's very important. We don't know. There are many rich people who do things that we're not aware of. We don't know everything that everyone does or what they have done. You know, sometimes we get very upset because so-and-so hasn't done this or the church hasn't responded in such a way. We don't really know what people have done unless we're in community with them. Then we do know. But certainly, I think what we are called to is not to be looking at what other people are not doing, but to be looking at what we're doing and saying, is that enough? There's always more that can be done. There's always an opportunity. If people don't know where they are, it doesn't take long you don't have to go very far to look at it. One thing it does, I'm going to finish up right now. One thing it does call us to, I think, however, is that we need to always have in our consciousness that there are both rich and poor among us. And that, as you said, we can be either one at any time, and we are often both at the same time. I think that we have to look at and realize that every person who we meet is potentially us. That's what's to say, to see Christ in other people, to see the community in other people, and to realize that we are connected. We are very connected in ways that we have no idea. And it's really, really important to keep that in mind as we help other people. It's 20 to 11, so we really need to stop. But I think it is a very good discussion about what the value of community can be, especially in helping people. And I hope you find some answers. I think you might find some answers today in people who engage you about your mother. And I think other people have these ideas about what can we do or how can we do it or whatever. Well, I can tell you it's much, much more possible when we're in a group than trying to do it by ourselves. The service continues with a creed on page 7. You all please stand. Let's say together, great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of our religion. Jesus was manifested in the flesh, communicated in the Spirit, seen by angels, preached among the nations, believed on the world, taken up to glory. Trust in the elementary doctrine of Christ and go on to maturity, by laying again a foundation of repentance for dead works and of faith toward God, with instructions about illusions, laying on of hands, resurrection of the dead, and eternal judgment. By this we will know the Spirit of God. Every spirit which confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God. O God, you promised to hear when we pray in the name of your Son. Therefore, in confidence and trust, we pray for the church. O God, our God, enliven the church for its mission. Breathe fresh life into your people. We pray for the world. Creator of all, lead us and every people into the way of justice and peace. Awaken us the sense of wonder for the earth and all that is in it.
Teach us to care creatively for its resources.
We pray for the community. God of truth, inspire with your wisdom those whose decisions affect the lives of others.
That all may act with integrity and courage.
Give grace to all whose lives are linked with others.
May we serve Christ to one another and love as Christ loves us.
Pray for those in need, especially those who have asked for our prayers whose names are listed herein. And all others who we remember at this time, either silently or loud. God of hope, comfort and restore all who suffer in body, mind, or spirit.
May they know the power of your healing love.
Make us willing agents of your compassion.
Strengthen us as we share in helping others become whole.
Remember with thanksgiving those who have died in the faith of Christ, and all others whose faith is known to you alone, especially all whose names we bring before you as we now speak them, either silently or loud. Those fighting for justice in Burma, Myanmar. Loving God,
Into your hands we commend them.
give comfort to those who mourn.
Bring them peace in their time of loss.
We praise you for all your saints who have entered your eternal glory.
May their example inspire and encourage us.
We pray for ourselves and our ministry. For God who called us to serve you, grant that we may walk in your presence, your love in our hearts, your truth in our minds, your strength in our wills, until the joy of our homecoming, the love of your grace is alive in us. Through Christ, by whom all things are possible. Amen. Let us confess our sins and sing together. God of loving heart, we confess before you those places in our hearts where we may refuse repentance. People we may refuse love, paths we never get around to changing, good things we have left undone. Come to us, light of Christ, shine those places we have hidden from you. Sweet clean the rooms of our hearts, that Christ may find home among us. Amen. The cross of Christ, God have mercy on you, pardon you, and set you free. Know that you are forgiven and be at peace. God strengthen all goodness and keep you in life eternal. Amen. Blessed are you, God of all creation. Through your goodness we have these gifts to share. Accept and use our offerings for your glory and for the service of your beloved community. This is a new hymn, into new hymns these days, as you noticed. Trying to give us some variety in what we sing. This is actually from the new Roman Catholic hymnal, which is called Journey Songs. And it's called Rain Down. It's an old folk song. Eric's going to play it through for us one time, and then we will do our best in singing. Rain down, your Lord, on your with you?
The Spirit is with us.
Lift up your hearts.
We lift them up to God.
Let us now give thanks to God.
It is right, Lord, thanks and praise.
Gather now, dear friends, around the banquet table of Christ. Come from near and far, from the familiar and the unknown. We are invited to this feast by Christ, who has opened the invitation to you and to me, not because we have earned it, but simply because it is God's good pleasure to do so. Come as you are. God does not rely on human divisions and prejudices, but welcomes all who yearn to be whole, who see in Christ Jesus one pathway to God. Open your arms to embrace the abundance which Christ's resurrection embodies. Bring gifts of thankful praise and offerings from your hearts, so that Christ's work in the world might be made real through the work of this congregation. And thanksgiving for all that a life lived in Christ brings to us and to the world, the supreme gift from you, whom we know to be a loving God, let us join our voices with angels and archangels and with all the company of heaven, who forever sing this hymn. God of mercy and God of love, God who made the stars above, God who formed the sea and earth, God who made creation work. We praise you, we thank you, we call upon your name to fill us and mold us with the Spirit as the flame glows. O God of mountain and God of high, God who makes our souls delight, be with us both night and day. Stay with us, O God, we pray. At this table we call together as Christ's beloved community, a people committed to nurturing the divine light in all whom we meet, friend and stranger alike. We're given unique tools for such an important task: bread to break and share, a cup from which to drink our fill. This is the paradox of the Christian life. We are charged with the task of transforming the world, yet we must do it one heart at a time, with each small flame as important as another. We are reassured, however, that this spirit is sustained by our coming together to share our memories of what God has done for us. This bread is broken, this cup poured out. Come, therefore, and eat and drink. Share your memories with one another. Bring your offerings, as simple or as grand as they might be, so that others too can keep the flame alive. By Christ, and in Christ, and through Christ, through whom and by whom all things are made possible. Amen. O God, the breath, the light of all, let this light creation shining where we live, and your counsel holds the body of longing call. Oneness of your spirit, voice our sin. Grant this day our needs and bread and inside, and loose the cords of error that still bind. Experience the strands we hold so tight, others lost to share our youth and pride. Oh, let their surface change, come to us deluded, but keep us clear for actions yet unblind. Fear belongs to the light, rooted in sunlight, the ash and blood, the type of song that beautifies all. And from age to age, brings down the wall, bearing fading light to be The peace of Christ rule in our hearts. Please greet your neighbor in the name of God.